Doreen Montgomery kept looking at her watch, knowing that Corporal Mack Moreau would show up any moment. Her mind buzzed with questions. They'd spent most of Sunday together until their plans had been completely kiboshed when he got another call in. Curious and yet determined to find out, she'd asked him about that call several times when they had talked throughout the day, but he wouldn't give her any answers. Of course he wouldn't, which meant it was a current case. Of course it was. He didn't deal with cold cases unless she dumped them in his lap. She almost laughed at that, because dumping things in his lap was something she had become pretty good at. And so far, he'd been absolutely great at picking up the ball and helping her out. But she also knew that his hands were tied more often than not, and he just couldn't do some things, which is also when she tended to jump in without him to get done what she needed. But at this point in time, she wanted to know if his current case was connected to what they had found at Sarson's Beach Park. She had driven back early this morning, but the box of poison was gone. Now she was relieved, but at the same time, she wanted an update. She looked down at Muggs, who sat ever so attentively at her side, staring at her lunch. "It's a salad. I'm getting better in the kitchen, but I'm surely not to the point where I'm cooking your meals, buddy." Muggs woofed at her. She laughed, walked over to the cupboard, and found the dog treats. As soon as she pulled out the bag, Goliath sauntered forward, and Thaddeus, who'd been sleeping on the roost nearby in the living room, immediately opened his eyes. "Thaddeus is here! Thaddeus is here!" She laughed and added affectionately, "You're all here, Idjit." He cocked his head at her, opened one eye, and just gave her that gimlet stare. He'd been doing that more often, especially when she gave him a term that he didn't particularly like. "Fine, okay." She rolled her eyes. "I apologize for calling you an Idjit." Not sure he understood the apology part. He still glared at her. She shook her head and chuckled. "I don't know if I've told you lately, guys, but you have certainly enriched my life." At that, Muggs woofed again. Doreen stood here, staring at them, a questioning look on her face. Meanwhile, Muggs nudged her hand, waiting for the treats there. "Oh, right." She laughed at the situation. She was calling them idiots, when she was one too, it seemed. At least she could laugh about it, and now knew, with her growing self-confidence, to acknowledge that she was smart enough when needed. She bent down and gave Muggs a treat, and then walked over and pulled out treats for Goliath. After she gave him one, Muggs raced over and barked, looking for another treat. "No," she shook her head. "You just got your treat. And you know that Goliath and Thaddeus also get treats of their own, right?" Muggs just gave her the most mournful look, with those huge brown eyes of his, and she felt her heart starting to melt. But she shook her head. "No, I know Mac is coming, and he's likely to give you treats too." She sighed. "We have to consider our budget, and we must also keep that waistline of yours somewhat in check." Of course, that just reminded her that they hadn't been for much of a walk, today. And she'd gotten to the point of saying W these days, even in her mind, because not only did Muggs understand the word, but Goliath did also, and so did Thaddeus now. Sometimes she thought Thaddeus could read her mind, because even now he hopped up and looked at her. "Walk, walk, walk." And that started Muggs off in a cacophony of barking. She glared at Thaddeus. Why do you have to go ruin the peace and quiet?" Instead of giving her a well-thought-out answer, he looked at her, bent over, and bobbed his head up and down. "Hee hee hee hee." She glared at him. "You know you're becoming a real pain, right?" He stopped and looked at her and blinked. And once again she felt like a heel. "Fine," she muttered. "While we should wait for Mac, let's go down to the creek." She opened the back door, letting Muggs lead the way, as he raced out into the backyard, barking, but at nothing. She shook her head at that, looked down at Goliath. He remained stretched out on the kitchen floor, eyeing the open door. "Do you want to come, buddy?" Goliath sniffed the air as if to say, "Ha, you finally invited me." And with that royal attitude, he sauntered out the door, even as Thaddeus hopped onto the railing out on the deck, a deck that she absolutely adored, and then onto her shoulder as she walked past. She looked over at him. "You could walk, you know." And he curled his head against her shoulder and whispered in a low voice, "Thaddeus loves Nan." "Yeah, I'm not Nan." He'd started doing that a couple times a day, too. Doreen wasn't sure if it was just about seeing Nan, or if this was Thaddeus's way of telling Doreen that he needed more attention. He lifted his head and looked at her with that stare,